World changes. We'll keep you up to date with the latest information. News Talk KVNU 102 FM 610 AM.
KVNU News Time is 5:05. I'm Bill Walter with this news update brought to you by Whole Tree Care. The American Lung Association just issued its 20th annual State of Tobacco Control Report, and Utah received good scores for its efforts to end tobacco use and save lives. Nick Torres, Advocacy Director for the Lung Association, said Utah is not doing a very good job ending the sale of all flavored tobacco products.
That it's important for us to really guard against what we're seeing in the tobacco industry is new products emerging, new flavors, new ways of attracting new and younger users to their products. And so it's really important for us to have as comprehensive laws as possible to protect against kids taking up these products and starting to erase all of the progress that we've seen over these past 20 years.
Now, Torres said some states are taking flavored tobacco products off the shelves completely. He said Utah has not kept up with other states in taxing tobacco products. Utah's lawmakers last raised the tax to $1.70 a pack in 2010.
We know that raising the cigarette tax is one of the most consequential ways that we can really keep smoking rates in check. We know that it works especially for youth access to deter youth from picking up the products. And so that's why we really focus on cigarette taxes as a way to go back continually, right, and raise those over time.
Now, Utah's best scores came from its work with tobacco prevention programs and creating stronger smoke-free workplace laws while also providing services to quit tobacco. KVNU News Time is 5:07. KVNU weather for tonight, mostly cloudy, mid-20s overnight. Cloudy in the morning, then partly cloudy, upper 40s on Wednesday. Thursday, mid-50s for the high with some sunshine. 48 was our high today. It's 46 right now at KVNU. KVNU weather brought to you by Mount Logan Laundry. If your quilts and blankets have a musty smell from use this winter, make sure to use Mount Logan Laundry's large capacity washers and dryers. Located in Logan and Brigham City, the cleanest spot in town, Mount Logan Laundry.
Is it too early to bring up yard work? What? Okay, but this is different. I'm talking about tree pruning. I know we haven't escaped winter yet, but right now is the best time to prune your trees. And the only thing you have to do is call Whole Tree Care, 760-6587. Right now they're offering an exclusive radio discount, so be sure to ask for it when you call, 760-6587. Get ahead of the spring rush. Get your trees and shrubs trimmed by Whole Tree Care, 760-6587.
KVNU News Time is 5:08. In 2021, Zion National Park broke the record for most visits to the park, officials said yesterday. They said 5,039,835 visits were recorded, the most in park history. Officials noted that Zion is among only a small group of national parks to ever exceed 5 million annual visits. Park officials said this milestone caps a decade during which the number of visits to Zion nearly doubled. Members of the National Park Service said they will continue to work to protect the unique resources that make Zion an iconic destination as they address challenges brought on by increased visitation. Increased visitation, they added, affects plants, animals, staff, volunteers, infrastructure, visitors' experiences, and more. There have been 33 crashes involving a wrong-way driver in just the first 2 months of 2022 in the state. 3 of those crashes resulted in someone's death. UHP provided Fox 13 News with these numbers detailing the number of wrong-way crashes and fatalities dating back to 2019. In 2019, there were 313 wrong-way crashes across the state, 12 of which were fatal. Those numbers went up the following year in 2020 with 340 crashes statewide. 21 of those crashes ended in someone's death. This year, UHP has had to work 7 wrong-way crashes. One of those incidents involved their own trooper, Devin Henson, using his car to stop someone driving down I-15 the wrong way. Major Jeff Neigber of the Utah Highway Patrol Assistant Superintendent, or is the Utah Highway Patrol Superintendent, and is urging people to make good, conscious decisions before even getting behind the wheel of their car. KBNU News Time is 5:10. For more details on these and other stories, visit CashValleyDaily.com.
Local news and the best talk. News Talk KVNU.
Wednesday edition of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show is an after-action deep dive into the State of the Union from last night. President Biden said a lot of what he thought. What did he hit on that we need to remind you of? That's coming up. Plus, Clay, what else?
The latest on Ukraine, and we'll be joined by Dr. Oz as he breaks down everything in the Pennsylvania Senate race and more. Come hang out with us Wednesday edition.
10 to 1 on News Talk KVNU. 102 FM at 610 AM.
This is the season to stock up. Up to 60% off all filters at the Napa Gold Filter Sale. Tractors, four-wheelers, backhoes, even lawnmowers. If it's got a filter, it's on sale at your locally owned Preston to Providence Napa Auto Parts. While supplies last, Napa 15W40, $12 a gallon. Napa Synthetic Blend Motor Oils, $2.59 a quart. Napa has all the brands. Amsoil, Schaefer, Mobil, Valvoline, Shell. The Napa Gold Filter Sale, now through March 15th.
Napa know-how. Napa know-how. The Best of Northern Utah, presented by Campbell Snacks, home of Pepperidge Farm, is back.
Best of Northern Utah.
Support your favorite businesses by nominating them now at bestofnorthernutah.com. Have a favorite restaurant? Nominate them. Love where you buy your car or where you get your hair done? Nominate them for Best of Northern Utah, the area's biggest celebration of local business. Couldn't live without your gym or your favorite plumber? Nominate them all right now at bestofnorthernutah.com. Presented by Campbell Snacks, home of Pepperidge Farm.
Best of Northern Utah.
Hi, I'm news correspondent Bob Woodruff. In 2006, a roadside bomb struck the armored vehicle I was riding in while reporting from Iraq. I sustained a life-threatening traumatic brain injury. The military term, "got your six," means I have your back. And that day, our service members had mine. During my recovery, I learned firsthand the challenges facing our service members who return home with injuries. While serving, their fellow service members always had their six. Now that they're home, it is our turn. We started the Bob Woodruff Foundation to make sure that the camaraderie and support they relied on in the military carries on, and we need you. Please join us as part of the Got Your Six initiative and help us be there for impacted veteran service members and their families. They've had our backs. It's time we have theirs. Learn more at gotyoursix.org. That's gotyoursix.org, using the number 6.
Feels like Tuesday. Tuesday has no feel.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People, Hour 2 of today's show, Tuesday, March 1st. I'm Jason Williams, Bill Walter here in the studio as well, and we are about to kick off this month's installment of the For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen right here in the studio with us. And this month, Mr. Petersen has brought a very timely book for us to discuss. It is titled, "This is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyberweapons Arms Race," and it is written by self-described cyber raconteur Nicole Perlroth, which is, I was mentioning, Craig, to Bill when I promoted this in Hour 1. That's a surprisingly hard last name to say for some reason. Perlroth. She's a journalist. Is that a fair description of her body of work?
Works for the New York Times, and this has been her beat for a bunch of years. She's actually quite young. She's 39, I think, 40 maybe at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The book actually became a New York Times bestseller.
Oh, wow.
It's not for everybody. It's a little longer book. It's about 500 pages. It's not for the subject. It's not overly technical. A lot of it deals with events and people, but...
Sure. It's so timely. I mentioned to listeners as well, I was reading an article. Obviously, some of the atrocities we're seeing in Russia's invasion of Ukraine are dominating the headlines justifiably. But an article in the Washington Post caught my eye. And it was pure speculation for the most part, other than the one confirmed fact, and the basis for the article is that the Pentagon presented President Biden with 10 different cyber warfare options. Now, obviously, it's classified information which one the commander-in-chief chose or what those 10 options were. There was a lot of speculation by security experts on what those 10 options might have been. But that was fascinating to me, this idea that they were having a cabinet meeting, as you would any war strategy decision, but they were talking about things that were going to happen online, that were going to be in the ether or the cloud.
And those can be equally disruptive, but they seem to have a little different connotation because they don't kill people. There's not blood and guts. We were talking before, Jason, in the area of nuclear weapons, there's a term called MAD, mutually assured destruction. And the notion is that if two sides have nuclear weapons, but they're relatively equally matched, that you're less likely to have a war because you realize that if you strike, that the other side's going to strike back equally.
Sure.
And I think that also applies here. And the characteristic of that is it's long-distance warfare. We're talking about being able to destroy from long distances. I think cyber war has the same characteristics. Again, we're talking about being able to destroy, again, from long distances, but we're also talking about the notion of each side has a capability. I'm sure Russia, if they wanted to, could do, and we'll talk about this later on, great disruption to the U.S. economy.
Sure.
But probably what causes them to deter from that is the fact that we could do that or even worse with them.
Sure. And it is, a good example of this, I think, is that the majority, if not all, the majority of our banking system, for example, is entirely virtual. Dollar bills don't change hands anymore. Gone are the days of people, running suitcases of cash back and forth between vaults and things like that. It's now just an electronic transaction.
Yeah.
And that's a system that can be crippled.
Yeah. In fact, let me share a story. I was going to share it later, but it's perfect now. The North Koreans they're actually fairly confident hackers, but they hacked into a New York bank, and they made a request from that bank for $1 billion transfer from a place in Pakistan or something like that. And they got into the bank, and the bank actually began the transfer. Ooh. And of the $1 billion, they actually transferred to the North Koreans $81 million.
Oh, man.
And what caused it to stop is somebody, I guess, noticed that the Koreans had misspelled the word foundation.
Oh, really?
And it raised a red flag for some reason.
Oh, wow.
So they stopped at that point. But, 81 million, actually a major source of revenue for the North Korean government is cyber hacking.
So basically fraud. That's the stuff we get, those annoying phone calls and texts on our phones, but now you have major world powers doing this to each other in a way. And, I know the United States as well has been, and I'm assuming this is detailed in the book, but we've been in this business for a while ourselves, right? In cyber warfare, where we're not in defensive posture, we're in an offensive posture.
In fact, a big part of the book talks about our defensive versus our offensive cyber technologies. And for years, the United States was way ahead, but now the gap's closed. And we'll talk about it later on, but one of the reasons the gap's closed is because people stole our stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we built it, and then we didn't keep it locked up well enough. And you know what? The question that always comes back to me before we get really into this, I whenever we're talking cyber warfare, I worry, one, it'll be easier to go to war, and we'll do it more often or even perpetually. And then I worry as well that one check that Congress has, the declaration of war, that power that rests with Congress, does it even come up when you're talking cyber warfare? If it can just be a few keystrokes and you've now enacted some sort of military strategy against another nation, does that require a declaration of war? Should it? I know it's a philosophical question,
I don't know.
But it's an interesting one.
I'm sure the president's powers aren't unrestricted, but I think that they're probably less restricted than they are for troops on the ground, boots on the ground warfare.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's an interesting ethical question, I guess, or constitutional question.
Yeah. Let's if it's okay, let's take this and tie it down to Ukraine as to why it's so relevant to Ukraine. Okay.
Okay.
Basically, Russia has used the Ukraine as a digital test kitchen for cyber warfare for years and years and years.
Wow.
They for 7 or 8 years, they attack Ukraine thousands of times a day with different types of hacks, probing, see if they can find a password, see if they can find a vulnerability. And then in 2015, this became a little bit more visible because they took control of Ukraine's power grid. And basically, they shut down one circuit breaker after another. And for a number of hours, it wasn't for a long time. I think they just did it to prove they could do it.
To see if,
but they left hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians without power. And then in 2017, it got even more serious. There'd been kind of a crooked, rigged election, and the Ukrainians ended up with a kind of a puppet president. And the Ukrainians rebelled against him. They deposed him. He was forced to flee to Russia.
Sure.
And they put in the present guy, Vladimir Zelensky. And the Russians retaliated on that. And in June of 2017, they launched what's been referred to, the book refers to as the most costly cyber attack in world history.
Wow.
So Ukrainians woke up. Their computers were all black. They couldn't take money from ATMs. They couldn't pay for their gas. They couldn't send or receive mail. They couldn't pay for a train ticket. They couldn't buy groceries.
Wow.
They couldn't get paid. And perhaps worst of all, the monitoring equipment on the radiation levels at Chernobyl all went offline.
Oh, wow.
But what's even scarier than that is that it was designed to attack Ukraine, but because of the nature of what we'll talk about in just a moment, it went beyond that. And so if you were a businessman doing business in Ukraine and you connected yourself to Ukraine, the tool that they used leaped on your computer, and this thing actually went around the world. It destroyed vaccines at Pfizer. It infiltrated computers at FedEx. And the world's biggest shipping conglomerate was brought to a halt in just a matter of minutes.
I remember that, leading to a huge supply chain disruption.
Yeah, it was gigantic. The thing that makes this possible now is our worldwide connectivity. You know, we've got the internet, and the internet was set up and designed as a decentralized system. So it's not like there's a gateway that blocks bad stuff out. It's just it was purposely designed to be decentralized for defense purposes. So that means it's impossible to control. And the other thing that's happened is over time we've kind of come to standardize software. You know, every country doesn't have the same software. It's pretty well Microsoft and some of the other major softwares, which means that when you hack at one place, you have the capability to hack at someplace else.
Sure.
This I think is really interesting. This is how this 2017 Ukrainian attack got started. There was a little software company in the Ukraine, and what they did is they made tax reporting software that was used by most of the Ukrainians in the country, most of the businesses in the country.
Wow.
Somebody was able to somehow infiltrate and put a worm, that is a code, into their software. And so anytime anybody tapped into that country, that worm went someplace else and embedded itself. Wasn't immediately activated, but it was activated on command.
Just hung out.
And that attack in 2017 worldwide cost $10 billion.
Wow.
The last part of the story on Ukraine is that this is ongoing. In January of 2022, the Russians took over a large number of government websites, and they weren't really malicious, but what they did is they changed what it showed on those websites, and every one of those websites said ominously, "Be afraid and wait for the worst."
I remember reading about that.
And the worst has come.
That is now this is interesting because you've just touched on something along these lines that's really important, because I remember reading about that story, but no time do I remember reading about that message popping up did I consider that cyber warfare. I thought of it as hacking. You know, you read about it all the time. Nerds are being disruptive, you know. This is warfare.
Yeah.
That's an interesting shift in perspective we'll probably all have to adapt to.
Yeah. You know, if you think about what cyber warfare really is, there are probably more components to this. One thing it would be to disrupt economic activity. You know, to seize a grid, to take a disrupt a business's data. Another component would be to steal information, which the Chinese have stolen huge amounts of information from U.S. companies. And the third one, though, is disinformation.
Yeah.
Or propaganda, or to sow fear, or something like that.
Muddying the waters.
Muddying the waters is a better way to say that. Yeah.
Consistent track.
Yeah, you know, that's pretty much what they did in the 2016 election. It wasn't so much they were successful in disrupting our election systems, what they did was sow misinformation.
Sure.
On the news last night, it was showing something about these websites, and they showed a couple of very attractive people, and they were kind of portrayed on these websites as being reputable. They actually didn't exist. They were computer-generated images, but they looked gorgeous, actually, a man and a woman.
Sure.
But they didn't exist.
It's fascinating to me, and the idea of actually manufacturing news with manufactured faces through artificial intelligence. We're talking about the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyberweapons Arms Race by New York Times journalist Nicole Perlroth. You can find this book everywhere and anywhere. It's only recently published and has been at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. It was there for quite some time. We'll continue the discussion and how this relates to the news we're seeing every day the last week plus out of Ukraine after Russia's invasion. The book, again, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Perlroth. Our guest, Craig Petersen, here in the studio for the For the People Book Club, which continues right after this.
For the first time ever, the Utah Broadcast Job Fair is going online. During this week through March 4th, it's the Utah Broadcasting Virtual Job Fair Week. The stations of the Cache Valley Media Group and the Utah Broadcasters Association invite you to see the job openings available now throughout the state. Radio and television stations from Logan to St. George are posting job opportunities currently available. You can register online, post your resume, and select the jobs that you're interested in. Stations will be notified and your resume will be sent directly to their email for further contact with you. The Utah Broadcasting Virtual Job Fair, going on now through March 4th, 2022, is brought to you in part by the stations of the Cache Valley Media Group and the Utah Broadcasters Association. For more information, go to www.utahbroadcasters.com and get started. Find your new career in broadcasting at utahbroadcasters.com.
Hi, this is Drew Allen with Allen Mortuaries. Over the years, thousands of families have planned ahead with Allen Mortuaries. Planning ahead helps you make informed and thoughtful decisions. It also spares your family the stress of making these decisions under the pressure of time and strong emotions. Allen Mortuaries' secure pre-need trust plan can save you nearly 40% versus other plans. Keep it simple, safe, and secure. Go with the proven choice, Allen Mortuaries. Voted best funeral home in Cache Valley in northern Utah. Allen Mortuaries. Then, now, always.
Welcome back to KVN News For the People. Craig Petersen, our guest this hour for the For the People Book Club. This week, talking about a very timely book, not immediately recently published. It's maybe a year, 2 years old?
21.
21, okay. So just about a little under a year old, but published before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But it's almost as if, this is written right about what we're reading in the headlines. The book's titled, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyberweapons Arms Race, and it's written by New York Times journalist Nicole Perlroth. And so I haven't read the book, but I did go through and pick through a lot of her talking about the book while she was on book tour and things like that. And Craig, I have to ask how she seemed to get in some places and find out some things that you would normally think would be, classified information. Were people just more willing to talk about the cyber side of this?
Almost by definition, this is stuff that people don't want to talk about because it's top secret stuff. There are a couple of things I think. First of all, she's like I said, she's reported at the New York Times. She's been on this beat for maybe as long as 10 years, so she's not new to the show.
She's made connections.
Yeah, and she'd published a lot of articles on it, so she knew people. And once you start to know people, you should talk about in the book how she'll just get a call or she'll get an email that somebody wants to communicate something to her.
Okay.
And so that happens sometimes. Another thing she did, it's kind of interesting, hackers have conferences, and they'll come together, and of course be the hackers there, and
sure.
and the businesses and the other governments and so forth. And sometimes what the hackers will do is they'll just want to show off what they can do. For example, there's an item in the book where this group of hackers drew up a list of 100 of the United States' most prominent companies. and then came back and showed that they had hacked all 100 of them within an average time of 15 minutes.
Wow.
So, part of this is kind of showing off. And so I think there's an element of ego in this. Of some of these people want to demonstrate about what they can do, and they're willing to share that.
Sure.
Some of the people she talked to were people who are no longer in government agencies. And as you read the book, some of them were actually very circumspect about what they told her. But she had enough backstory that she could kind of augment and understand what they're saying to her.
So they would say something like, we did this in this undisclosed location, but then she had the supplemental information to know where it was.
Exactly.
And, okay.
Exactly. I was telling you a funny story that one time she went to this hackers convention, and they weren't happy about her being there. In fact, they actually disinvited her. And she walks in, and they give her a necklace made out of these glow sticks and put it around her and said, you got to wear this so everybody will know you're a reporter.
That's and she did it to get the story,
she did it,
right?
Yeah.
This is, I was familiar with her name from stories she's written about, the cyber world in general in the New York Times. This book, it's worth pointing out, this was published before the invasion, obviously, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it was written with this in mind, the tension that has existed for, Putin's been amassing troops at the border for over a year now, and that's why she wrote this, for that reason.
Yeah, I think really kind of if I were to identify the message of the book, it's that this is inevitable, that we're not prepared. The United States is uniquely, vulnerable. I mean, think about Russia. Russia controls their infrastructure centrally. The United States is totally decentralized. Businesses have been resistant to regulation and so forth, and so we may be vulnerable, and the government, at least at the highest level, hasn't taken this very seriously to protect ourselves. Well, the government has done a lot on offensive cyber war, going after other countries, but we've been much less comprehensive about defensive, protecting our own infrastructure.
That is, I remember, in fact, just recently reading about some of the potential exposure of our power grids. So we have some really, really outdated power grids, and it would be, from what I read, it would be somewhat easy for someone to take out a chunk of population the size of the Wasatch Front, just to take them offline.
Yeah,
and it would take us hours, if not days, to figure out how to undo that. Nothing physically is damaged, but the economic cost, the personal cost, it'd be hard to put a dollar amount on that.
Actually, sometimes physical things are damaged. I just was thinking about this. There was an event with an oil pipeline company a couple of years ago, and they were hacked, and they were offline, not just in terms of their computer systems, but their pipeline, their transport of oil, was off for a couple of weeks.
Sure.
And it caused severe disruptions in the United States. The Northeast wasn't able to get oil for that time. That was a cyber attack.
It was just last year. The JBS meat company was hacked, and now that wasn't, well, Russia may have been loosely involved, but that was a ransom group, but it still increased the price of meat globally for some time. Give you an idea of the effect this could have. Our guest here in the studio again, Craig Petersen, talking to us this week on the For the People book club about Nicole Perlroth's This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyberweapons arms race. And this is extremely relevant with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing U.S. response and European response to that invasion, which is very cyber. We'll keep talking about it. If you have comments or questions, 753-5868. We'll be back right after the news with KVNU's Bill Walter.
Jason. KVNU News Time is 5:33, and the news is brought to you by the Duck Hunter. Governor Cox praised the courage and patriotism of Ukrainians in the face of Russian aggression and asked Utahns to support Ukraine during a rally at the Utah State Capitol Monday evening.
To the 1,500 Ukrainians that live here in Utah, we love you, and we are united with you. But I also want to say something to the hundreds and thousands of Russians that live here as well. We do not hold you responsible for the acts of a madman.
The governor called Ukrainians' willingness to fight for their homeland inspiring. Cox was joined by Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, Senate President Stuart Adams, House Speaker Brad Wilson, and Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall. along with lawmakers and other government officials. Earlier Monday, the Utah legislature unanimously voted to condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Cox also emphasized that this is Putin's war and urged the world not to retaliate against innocent Russian people.
I believe Ukrainians are fighting for the very things that sit at the foundation of our own country. They're fighting for natural laws and self-evident truths and unalienable rights. They're fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're fighting for liberty and justice for all.
The flag of Ukraine flew above the east side of the state capitol. Freeway signs changed to Utah Stands with Ukraine, and state universities and private businesses throughout the state showed their support by projecting yellow and blue lights on buildings and outdoor features. A 39-year-old Logan man has confessed to sexually abusing a teenage girl nearly 2 years ago. Alexander Perkins accepted a plea deal and will now wait to be sentenced in 6 weeks. Perkins participated in a virtual hearing in First District Court Monday morning. He pleaded guilty to one count of aggravated sexual abuse of a child, a first-degree felony. Defense attorney Shannon Demler explained that as part of the resolution, prosecutors agreed to drop a remaining felony against the defendant. They will also not recommend more than 6 years incarceration at sentencing. Smithfield City police officers were called to investigate the sexual assault after the victim told her parents about what happened. She explained being sexually abused by Perkins, who is a family acquaintance. The crime occurred in June 2020. The case has been partially delayed because of the coronavirus pandemic that limited in-person court proceedings. It was scheduled for trial March 15th. Perkins remains out of jail on $40,000 bail and will be sentenced in April. He could be sentenced to up to life in prison or less time if the judge accepts attorneys' recommendations. And an inmate at the Box Elder County Jail was found dead Monday morning from a suspected suicide. Jed Kalatz, a 49-year-old Bear River City man, was discovered in cardiac distress at approximately 11:15 a.m. According to a press release, Box Elder County Chief Deputy Cade Palmer said Kalatz was found during a safety and security check by jail deputies. He was alone in a locked cell. Jail deputies and medical staff reportedly began providing emergency medical care immediately. Brigham City Emergency Medical Services also responded to assist, but resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. Palmer said a preliminary investigation indicated Kalatz's death was caused by suicide. However, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office activated the Northern Utah Critical Investigative Team to conduct an independent investigation into the incident. KBNU News Time is 5:37.
John at the Duck Hunter asks, have you ever checked the dryer vent cover on the outside of your home? It could be broken, full of lint, or worse yet, you could have an unwanted guest living in it. John suggests you check your dryer vent today. And if you can't, call John at the Duck Hunter. He'll do a visual inspection, and if needed, run a camera through the dryer vent line to see what's going on in there. For a free consultation, call the Duck Hunter, 770-4813.
We are the Duck Hunter. Breathe better, save money, protect your home. We are the Duck Hunter.
KBNU weather for tonight, mostly cloudy skies, low in the mid-20s. Cloudy to start the day on Wednesday, becoming partly cloudy, upper 40s, and then partly sunny, mid-50s on Thursday before a chance of rain developing on Friday afternoon. It's been to 48. It's 47 right now at KBNU. KBNU weather brought to you by Adams Wealth Advisors. Expect specific guidance from advisors that adhere to principles of honesty, professionalism, and integrity. Visit adamswealthadvisors.com to schedule a time with an advisor today. For more details on these and other stories, visit CashValleyDaily.com.
This is the season to stock up. It's the Napa Gold Filter Sale. Up to 60% off all filters, tractors, four-wheelers, backhoes, even lawnmowers. If it's got a filter, it's on sale at your locally owned Preston to Providence Napa Auto Parts. While supplies last, Chevron Dello 15W40, $13 a gallon. Napa Synthetic Motor Oil, $3.89 a quart. Stock up big before oil prices increase. Seafoam Motor Treatment, $6 a can. The Napa Gold Filter Sale now through March 15th.
Napa know-how. Napa know-how.
Hi, this is Gordon Deal. Wednesday on This Morning, America's First News, a recap of President Biden's State of the Union and the Republican response. Plus, a look at how the Russian invasion of Ukraine could play a role in the midterm elections. Also, the companies that see March as the month to bring workers back to the office. And how to protect yourself against a cyber attack during the ongoing conflict between Moscow and Kiev. Wednesday on This Morning, America's First News. From 4 to 6 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. It's the For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen here in the studio. And this week's installment, Craig brings to the table a book by New York Times journalist Nicole Perlroth. And it's titled, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyberweapons Arms Race, the subtitle of the book. Published in 2021, but extremely relevant here today with the constant news coming out of Ukraine and, of course, the U.S. and European response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And really, cyber warfare didn't start there, won't end there, but it's this is a big test of things that have not. The word escapes me. It's not theoretical, but this is the first active engagement, warfare engagement, that with global interest, in which a lot of these ideas are going to be put to the test in an actual wartime scenario. So a lot is going to be learned, wouldn't you say?
I think so, too. And I think particularly where the United States can involve, and again, boots on the ground, then the cyber warfare may becomes the alternative.
Sure.
One of the sanctions. I mean, I'm guessing that we could sanction Russia more severely with cyber warfare than anything else we've done. But on the other hand, then we become vulnerable to them, what they do to us. Sure.
There would be a response, and they have some capability there as well. Like you said, with MAD, with the nuclear, the self-imposed nuclear deterrence.
I've got a great example of attack and response if we've got time.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely.
So the United States and Israel has been very concerned about the Iranian nuclear program for a long time.
Sure.
The Israeli solution was just bomb the heck out of them, destroy their facilities. But they finally put them so far underground that wasn't very effective. And so in 2008, the United States actually launched a cyber attack approach.
Interesting.
And the way it worked was something like the following. The nuclear program of Iran involved enriching uranium. And the way you do that is with a centrifuge, which is just a spinning cylinder, spinning at 100,000 revolutions per minute, if you can imagine that. And what it does is by spinning, the heavier U-238 is forced to the outsides. No, it's not forced to the outsides. It's kept on the inside, and so it separates the two. The problem with these centrifuges is they spin so fast. If they spin even faster than they're intended, then what will happen is they'll just blow up.
Sure.
On the other hand, if you stop it...
And it's a big explosion,
It's a big
right?
explosion, yeah. Right. Well, actually, it's not fissionable material, but on the other hand, if you put the brakes on them too fast, then it kind of throws them off their platform, and they become kind of a torpedo going through the building. And so what the United States did is they used what's called a worm, and a worm is just a piece of computer code that kind of works its way through a system. And we don't know exactly how it got in there. It might have been from an infected flash drive. There might have been a mole or something like that. But at any rate, this worm got into their system, and it was very, very selective. It looked for systems that did certain things, and one of the things that it looked for was systems that controlled exactly 164 machines. And the reason for that is because Iran set up its centrifuges so that each system was controlled 164. So anything else it didn't bother with. But what it did is it went in, and basically it told these centrifuges to speed up or to shut down. At the same time it was doing this, and they were running either too fast or shutting down very fast, the data that was being given to the monitoring systems of the Iranian engineers suggested that everything was just fine. And what we ended up doing with that is Iran at the time had about 8,700 centrifuges. We destroyed 2,000 of them.
Wow.
So this was not insignificant. It was
More than a third of their,
about a third of them,
centrifuge supply.
But of course, once we did that, it was pretty obvious that it wasn't the New Zealand that did this. It was the United States that did it. So they launched an incredibly destructive attack on Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil company, and basically demolished 30,000 of their computers, wiped their data, and replaced it all with an image of a burning American flag.
Wow.
And then later on, within another month, they actually began to attack U.S. banks, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, all our biggest banks. And they did it using something called the denial of service. And what they did is just overwhelmed them to the point where their websites went down. And it was a hugely effective attack.
Sure.
In retaliation. Yeah.
And you mentioned, that a lot of these tools we built and then were stolen from us. Denial of service is an example of that.
Yeah.
The U.S. military actually invented this virus, basically, first, and then everyone else saw how it worked and said, we can build that.
Yeah.
One thing that you mentioned several times now, the concept of the worm has come up, and as you've explained, it's actually a small chunk of code. It's not kids can write them. What scares me about that is that as you mentioned, we maybe haven't been as prepared for this in the years that we've had to build up preparation as we should have. And what worries me with this situation with Russia and Ukraine, as far as the U.S. is concerned, is that if Russia knew this was imminent, which it seems for a few years it's at least been in Putin's head, those worms could be sitting somewhere right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they implant them, quote unquote, and then they just wait. And some of them are designed to look for a date. As you mentioned, these in Iran were designed to look for a certain speed of spinning. And then once that trigger is it activates the worm and it does what it's designed to do.
And that could be years in the future. In fact,
years.
The attack on Iran, actually, these things didn't go in and just attack. They went in and sat there for a while until we found a propitious moment.
That's interesting.
And then they activated themselves. It's kind of interesting. Iran did one other thing. Not everything works when you do cyber warfare.
Sure.
They one of the directors in the United States got a call saying the Iranians are into the Bowman Dam. They have control of the Bowman Dam in Oregon. This is a 245-foot high dam which protects 10,000 people below it.
Yeah.
And what the Iranians were trying to do was open the sluice gates, just basically flood the area.
Oh, wow.
And 10,000 people, most of them probably would have died.
Sure.
What happened, though, it's kind of funny. There's another dam in New York, also called the Bowman Dam. The one in Oregon is 245 feet high and protects people. The one in New York is 20 feet high and protects against flooded basements.
Sure.
And that's the one they got into. They
broke that one instead.
They got into that one, yeah. And it turned out the gates on that one were down for maintenance, so they didn't hurt anybody.
That's a stroke of luck there, but also illustrates what when we say cyber warfare, that's what we're talking about. It's traditional warfare in the sense that the goal is the same, to extract a certain preferred reaction from a foreign adversary,
or just information. Secrets.
Oh, sure.
I mean, often it's secrets. The China. In fact, in the book it says that there are two types of companies in the United States: those that know they've been hacked by the Chinese, and those that don't know they've been hacked by the Chinese. But they've all been hacked.
It's very believable, considering China really led on this. And I don't claim for a second to understand the reasons why. But when it comes to cyber espionage, to cyber warfare and cyber weaponry, China really was kind of ahead of the game, ahead of the curve. But then at the same time, China's also a good example, and I wonder if this comes up in the book, that as you mentioned with MAD and nuclear deterrence, self-imposed nuclear deterrence, recognizing if you launch, the other side knows you launch the minute you do, and they're going to launch in response, and everybody dies. That same thing exists here, right? Where they know there's still traditional limitations on using some of these weapons, right?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
So how did she handle that in the book? I mean, it's a difficult question to ask because I don't want you to spoil the book for anyone. How does it end? But how does it end? How do you wrap this type of thing up? Does she just sign off, good luck?
Pretty much. Basically, she says, the United States is extremely vulnerable. We've got to step up and really do more about our defensive capabilities. For example, one of the things she talks about, this is just a little simple thing, is password, something as simple as a password. And she says, you've got to use more complex passwords. But the other thing she talks about is two-factor authentication. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, basically, if I log into Utah State, I'll log into my Utah State account, and I'll get something saying we're going to push a notice to your cell phone, and then I have to approve that. And so there's 2 steps to my entry into the system.
So having your password is not enough.
Not enough. That's just the first step. I actually have to verify that I have to push a button and say on my phone that we're going to do this. And that's a very effective technique, but it's, we're kind of resistant to. The other thing she talks about is even though you have firms like Microsoft on their newest editions of their software patching these errors and so forth, a lot of people don't update their software.
Sure.
They're using outdated software, so it's vulnerable, and it'll always be vulnerable.
Sure.
And we have really no way in the United States to correct that because there's no mandate to do that.
Sure. That's, I tell everyone, especially on your cell phone and your mobile devices, the minute an update is available on your mobile devices, get it. Oftentimes there's a really good reason for that. We're talking cyber warfare in light of the news out of Ukraine with the Russian invasion. The book, again, titled, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, published last year by New York Times journalist Nicole Perlroth. And the subtitle of that book, The Cyberweapons Arms Race. We'll keep the conversation going with our friend Craig Petersen here in the studio right after this.
Jessup Insurance and Retirement Services. Let us guide you.
Do you have retirement questions about financial planning and investing, Medicare, estate planning, or complex tax strategies? Jessup Insurance can answer those questions. Let Jessup Insurance guide you into a better retirement. Call Jessup Insurance 435-213-3200 or Google Jessup Insurance.
Jessup Insurance and Retirement Services. Let us guide you.
Wednesday edition of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show is an after-action deep dive into the State of the Union from last night. President Biden said a lot of what he thought. What did he hit on that we need to remind you of? That's coming up. Plus, Clay, what else?
The latest on Ukraine, and we'll be joined by Dr. Oz as he breaks down everything in the Pennsylvania Senate race and more. Come hang out with us Wednesday edition.
10 to 1 on News Talk KVNU, 102 FM and 610 AM.
There's a lot going on right now, and broadcasters are on the ground covering all of it, bringing you the weather, the traffic, and breaking news, all while entertaining you 24 hours a day. Someone needs to tell you what's going on around the world and in our hometowns. And that someone is us. We are free radio. We are always there. We are broadcasters. Visit wearebroadcasters.com or text radio to 52886 to learn more. Furnished by NAB and this station.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Craig Petersen here in the studio with us for the People Book Club, talking about the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyberweapons Arms Race. Very relevant and timely today, though it was published in 2021, considering the Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the international response, which has been very cyber weapons related. The author, Nicole Perlroth of the New York Times journalist. And Craig, we were just, kind of joking during the break there, and I'd forgotten about this, but remember reminding myself that when Obama was first elected, there was not really a scandal, but I remember a few stories were written. I was like, is that a BlackBerry? Is he holding a BlackBerry? And the president in 2008 was using a phone that was no longer being updated by the manufacturer. And then within weeks, you saw him with an iPhone. And for a lot of people, that was just not even, a noteworthy event, but that was a national security event. They forced him to switch to an iPhone after he left the campaign trail and became president for security reasons. And that, I think, illustrates how sensitive this whole world is.
Yeah, and in fact, the book talks about this, that when iPhones came out, it changed everything because in a lot of countries were no longer interested in people's computers. They just wanted to hack the iPhones because of the kind of information that was there. In fact, you remember the Snowden WikiLeaks?
Yeah.
They leaked a lot of stuff from NSA, the National Security Agency. The book suggests that the most damaging thing that they leaked was the fact that the United States, the NSA, had been tapping Angela Merkel's phone for years, the German chancellor.
Sure.
And it caused a huge international incident.
using a software tap.
Yeah.
It wasn't a physical tap.
Yeah,
no
it was
one,
a software tap,
no one
yeah.
snuck in and put a bug in the earpiece like in the movies.
One of the things, the book spends a lot of time talking about the market for people who've been able to hack into things. And, initially the way when it started out, hackers, a lot of times they hacked just because to show they could do it, for recognition, things like that. And the response of firms, I think I mentioned this, was, we're going to prosecute you. You're doing something illegal. Over time, that's changed, and now that's become a business. And a person who's a good hacker of an important tool like Windows or something like that, if they have a good hack that Microsoft hasn't fixed, they could sell that for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000.
Sure.
And
often to Microsoft.
Yeah, right. But to Microsoft to fix it, or to governments to exploit it, or to terrorists.
Sure.
And it's an interesting market. And the NSA is interesting on this because the NSA, over time, now has a business where they actually pay for these hacks. And the NSA, when they get these hacks, there are a couple of things they do with them. If they decide they're not relevant for national security, they'll turn around and say to Microsoft, you've got a problem, you've got to fix it. But in many cases, they don't tell the firms. And this has caused a huge amount of animosity between the firms and the NSA. If the NSA decides that they can exploit these things and use them, they don't tell Microsoft. And so they keep it and they use it to exploit it, because it's not just sometimes in the United States, actually, in surveilling Americans and American companies, but also around the world.
Sure.
But what happened is you had the WikiLeaks. That wasn't too serious for NSA, but there was another group called the Shadow Brokers, and they got into Microsoft's, NSA stuff, probably through a mole, and leaked virtually all of these hacks that NSA had, and they became public domain. There's one in particular called Eternal Blue, and Eternal Blue is actually the tool that Russia used to hack into the Ukraine. And it was developed by the United States.
That to me is, and then I'm remembering, Craig, as well. This was a discussion a few years ago on the Transparency Advisory Board, which we haven't met since the pandemic began. But one of our last few meetings, we were talking about infrastructure questions. The legislature wanted us to explore whether, they should use this service or that service for back end, as they call it. And I remember learning that much of the state of Utah runs, when it comes to all this cyber stuff, and that's everything from workforce services to employee payroll for state employees and teachers. Most of it runs off of either an Amazon server suite or Microsoft, and they're hackable.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking of that now as you're detailing
particularly
elements
if they're not upgraded,
of this book.
particularly if they're not up to date.
Sure. And that gets expensive,
Yeah.
and that gets. So as you're reading this book, did you envision? Are we just going to have one day a military that's just a bunch of 16-year-olds in basements and keyboards with classified information? Or that's sort of where this makes your mind go.
It's kind of amazing how effective very young people sometimes are. One of the hackers it talks about in here was a 16-year-old. Another one, it was a ransomware attack that had been launched by, I think, the North Koreans. And it was actually solved by a 22-year-old hacker who was able to take all these ransomware requests and divert them to a website address that he'd bought for $11.
Wow.
But the government did it. He did it. He figured it out.
That is...
It happens surprisingly often.
It's fascinating and yet extremely frightening when you consider, global economies depend on this, this carefully constructed cyber world, and then you have, kids that young who can break it.
In fact, think about that. Think about nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons cost billions and billions and billions of dollars to produce. There are virtually no barriers to entry in hacking into a system. All you need is a computer in your basement and some intellectual skills.
Sure. And that is, literally, as you said, only large governments with a lot of collective, funding through taxpayer collection or revenue could build a nuke. But a kid for about, even a nice system, about $500 these days, and a $50 a month internet connection, and you could take down the international banking for a period of time.
That's literally all you need. It's the cost is the intellectual skill of the individual. If the person has the individual skill, the equipment's trivial.
That is, I also remember in our final moment here, bad time to bring this up, I guess, but or final 30 seconds, actually. It is during Romney's run for Senate in that primary, something like 5.2 million a day attempts to breach Utah's election system. Now, all successfully thwarted. That's good. But it just gives you the idea of the scale of this, the money that could be made, the reason people would want to get into it in the first place. The book, again, this is how they tell me the world ends, The Cyberweapons Arms Race by